An auteur. Noun. A filmmaker whose personal influence and artistic control over a movie are so great that the filmmaker is regarded as the author of the movie. Many filmmakers have been regarded as auteurs throughout history, whether it's Quentin Tarantino in his iconic and very graphic action movies, or Orson Welles in his masterpieces like Citizen Kane or the Paul Masson French champagne advertisement.
Action, please.
The French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence.
Though, of all the auteurs, none will ever come close to the level of greatness in my eyes as the legendary John Carpenter. Only a man such as him could make some of the most intense and blood-pumping action movies like Escape from New York, while also managing to make some of the most iconic horror movies ever made, like, I don't know, Halloween? I mean, hell, one of my all-time favorite movies made by him is They Live, which combines both of his specialties into one movie. However, there is one film that really stands out for the rest of John Carpenter's work. Yup, that's right. Elvis, the hit 1979 film featuring Kurt Russell as Elvis. Okay, but on a more serious note, even though John Carpenter does specialize in horror, the gore factor in his movies are relatively mild. Like, if you look at any of his classics like Halloween or The Fog, all the characters that die in these films are pretty much just from quick stabs. The exception to this gore factor in his horror classics, however, is his stomach-churning 1982 film, The Thing. To be perfectly honest, for years I've actively avoided watching this movie, because the two main things I've heard about it is that one, it's disgustingly gory, but also, the plot is particularly disturbing. Picture this. You work in an Arctic research lab when your team gets disturbed by the sounds of a Norwegian helicopter chasing a dog before the helicopter crashes. After rescuing the dog, your team investigates a nearby Norwegian base only to discover everyone dead and some burnt remains. After doing an extensive autopsy on the burnt remains, it's revealed that this thing can assimilate whatever living beings it comes in contact with. And even more disturbingly, it's also revealed that there's a high likelihood that at the very least one of the team members has already been infected by the thing, and is trying to blend in. And now, you don't know who's human and who's the thing. That's pretty much what the plot of The Thing is. And when I saw it for the first time, I was terrified, disgusted, but also I was very fascinated by the film. The concept of assimilation has always been such an intriguing and disturbing concept for me when it comes to horror films and media in general. Films such as The Blob or Invasion of the Body Snatchers have always been super fascinating and disturbing to me. And the thing that really sucks is that there isn't much in the realm of horror media that covers the topic of assimilation. And honestly, I find that to be really heartbreaking. And honestly, the few pieces of horror media out there that does cover assimilation just doesn't do it like John Carpenter's The Thing. Or, at least, that was until I discovered a certain series on YouTube. It all started just like any other day where I'm eating lunch watching some Fat Magic videos when I see on my recommend a video titled SFM Horror, The Empty Server. Now, I usually indulge a bit into watching SFM creepypasta animations, so I initially didn't think too much about it, thinking it would just be something corny like an evil haunted empty TF2 server where the engineer with hyper-realistic bloody eyes shows up and smiles evilly. However, after watching this video, I became deeply invested in this horror series, SERVERBLIGHT. SERVERBLIGHT really stands out compared to other TF2 horror-related content because it manages to stay true to the source material while also managing to make this ridiculous hat simulator legitimately scary. It's why things like Hoovie Dundee and Emesis Blue are some of my all-time favorites when it comes to TF2 horror. They're scary while also remaining very faithful to the source material. The other aspect about SERVERBLIGHT that makes it stand out so much to me is for the same reason why I went on that yap sesh about John Carpenter and The Thing. To me, this entire series evokes that exact same feeling of dread and disturbance that The Thing made me feel. The fear of not knowing who is and isn't assimilated. The dread of what will happen when it gets you. And the disturbance of seeing someone that's been assimilated. And even though the series doesn't have the gore that The Thing has, trust me when I say that this series will make your stomach drop. But do you want to know what makes my stomach drop? It's the knowledge that you haven't subscribed yet! Ooh! Ooh! You want to subscribe so badly! Okay, but seriously, please do subscribe. It helps out way more than you realize. And while you're there, be sure to like this video. It lets me know you want to see more content like this in the future. Anyways, enjoy the video. Oh, also consider being a channel member to see videos early. Thanks. At the time of me writing this, there's 5, technically 7 official installments of the SERVERBLIGHT series, and I strongly urge you to check them out yourself before going any further. Be sure to show the creators lots of love and support. They've clearly worked their asses off on this series, and they've definitely earned every little bit of praise they've gotten. The link to the playlist with this series will be in the description down below. With that out of the way, the story of SERVERBLIGHT begins with the empty server. This video starts off fairly unassuming, with the protagonist of this video, Dixalot, joining a Thunder Mountain game, where we see many typical TF2 interactions. You know, like a guy rudely telling you to game end yourself when you join the game, or a spy randomly running off a cliff, or a scout who can seemingly control his facial expressions letting you shoot him? Alright, something definitely feels off about this server. However, after being irritated by how empty and boring the server is, Dixalot discovers he strangely isn't able to disconnect. I feel like it's also worth knowing an easy to miss detail here. As Dixalot is complaining about the server, we see a heavy ragdoll which ends up despawning. What's notable about this detail is that in between the shots of the ragdoll being there and it despawning, we can faintly hear the heavy say in a distorted voice, After noticing the payload's almost capped, he heads on over to presumably finish the round, but then he gets sidetracked when he hears footsteps inside of a building. Inside, Dixalot finally comes face to face with the person that's been telling him to game end himself since he joined the game. An engineer moving like a person instead of a video game character. After coming face to face with this engineer, we discover that he wasn't trying to be a prick. He was actually warning him. But before he could explain any further, he sees something behind Dixalot and runs off with his tribalman Shiv. When he turns to see what's behind him, we're greeted with a very unsettling sight. A heavy's arm poking out from behind the doorway, and he has, 6 fingers. Whatever this thing is also tries to lure him towards it using a distorted medic voice line. The thing that makes Dixalot's fight or flight really kick into full gear, however, is when we see whatever this thing is quickly move all 6 of its fingers. And honestly, can you blame him? I'd also be running like a bat out of hell if I saw that. Especially if it were to happen in what I thought was just a normal TF2 game. When Dixalot runs up the stairs in the building he's in, we see the engineer's game ended himself, and is written on the wall with his own blood, "Don't let it take you alive." After reading this, he realizes he needs to do what that spy did at the start of the game, and runs like hell. All the while, the entity that was behind the doorway runs after him in hot pursuit. In this pursuit, we only get to see bits and pieces of what the creature that's chasing after Dixalot looks like. But of what we can see, it seems like it masses several characters into one being. Right before it seems like the mass of bodies reaches Dixalot, he just barely makes off the cliff on the map, where he jumps off and is then able to disconnect. The episode then ends with a shot of part of what this entity is, where it seriously just looks like a cluster of characters with stretched out limbs. And, of course, the game crashes. For the first installment, unsurprisingly, things are a bit vague. However, I'll try to analyze this to the best of my ability. First, I'd like for you to take note of every player name in this installment, and all future installments, as they may or may not be relevant throughout the series. Second of all, let's just cut to the chase and address the elephant in the room. This thing. The SERVERBLIGHT. Here's what I can discern from it so far. It seems to be sentient, and it seems to like to toy with its victims. Not only that, but it also seems to be able to stop players from disconnecting, and it almost seems to be able to drag the players into the game somehow. Wait, how's that even possible? Like, do their bodies get, sucked into the game? Or do their consciousnesses get dragged into the game? That's such a weird word to say, consciousnesses. What happens to the player themselves if they get caught by the SERVERBLIGHT? It's very apparent and heavily implied with the Heavy's ragdoll and voice line that the SERVERBLIGHT is made up of multiple characters, and it's probably not too far-fetched to assume it's sort of like a gray goo that adds players to itself. But what happens to the player themselves? Part of me almost thinks that maybe the victims are sentient and aware of the situation they're in right now, as most of them seem to be screaming for help. Also, something else I found to be a bit interesting that I noticed after watching this installment a couple of times, is that the SERVERBLIGHT seems to only be made up of slower characters and characters with bad mobility. I mean, sure, there's definitely a demo man and soldier in there, but be so for real for a moment. If you realize you suddenly got dragged into TF2 in the middle of a gaming sesh, and you see an eldritch abomination barreling towards you, would you instinctively rocket or sticky jump away? Cause I highly doubt it. That's not how fight or flight works. You'd probably either freeze up, run like hell, or start shooting at it. And if you were to run like hell as soldier and demo, something like the SERVERBLIGHT could catch up pretty damn easily. Point being, I believe whatever the hell the SERVERBLIGHT is more than likely started in this exact server. And it's only just getting started, gathering bodies by targeting the easiest to catch classes. Cause, I didn't hear any scouts or spies scream for help in that mass of bodies. And wouldn't you know it, a scout and spy were able to evade it. Though I also didn't hear any engineers or snipers, neither of which are known for their evasive abilities. So maybe my theory of the SERVERBLIGHT going after easy to catch players is wrong. I don't know. Maybe we can get some more answers in the next installment, Migration. This installment opens immediately after where we left off, right after Dixalot jumps off the cliff and disconnects. And we're introduced to our new protagonist, a free-to-play engineer named Johnny Danny 12. Is it Johnny Danny? Joni Danny? What the hell kind of name is this? Immediately after loading into the game, we see, suspiciously in the chat, the engineer from the last installment, Gillysuit, just saying, "I'm having so much fun." It's also worth noting that every time he says this, we hear a meaty ragdoll sound and something hitting the environment. However, Johnny Danny, being the classic oblivious free-to-play not caring about anything in the world, brushes us off. After walking outside and seeing the payload almost capped, he does probably the most free-to-play thing ever and builds a sentry without ever making a dispenser. Like, dude, you picked up an ammo box, you can make a dispenser, stop upgrading your sentry! Honestly, I just love how realistic this portrayal of free-to-play is, pre-2020 mass meeting of all free-to-plays. Dude is just in his own world, low-key, not giving a single damn about the guy spamming the same message over and over again in the chat. However, Johnny Danny finally ends up giving in and investigates the weird thumping sound he's been hearing. And he ends up discovering the source of it, which ends up being the engineer we saw from the last installment, slamming his head onto the floor with a smile on his face. Or is he? Hey, Vsauce, Marcy here. Look at the crack in the floor here. See that? That is almost definitely an arm moving around. It actually seems like this arm is controlling Gillysuit. In other words, this is bait, and Johnny Danny took it. Once the SERVERBLIGHT reveals itself, Johnny Danny initially starts to run away, but somehow he managed to disconnect right before it got him. Or did he? Hey, Vsauce. No, I'm not doing the same bit twice within the same minute. But really, did he actually manage to disconnect before it got him? Because, disturbingly, after Johnny Danny disconnected, the SERVERBLIGHT then says, After that, every single player in its mass disconnects, including Gillysuit and the scout Dixalot headshotted. Well, this installment definitely has some disturbing implications. This is the first time we've seen the SERVERBLIGHT using the chat instead of using voice lines. To me, it almost seems like it's learning, and learning quick too. It even seems to be learning how to lure players into it a little bit more effectively, this time by using Gillysuit as a puppet to create enough noise to lure Johnny Danny to it. And while we're here, let's talk about Johnny Danny real quick. First of all, how in the hell did he manage to disconnect? I have two theories, but I think one is a little bit more likely than the other. My first, less likely theory is he Alt F4 to shut off his computer. Now, the reason why I think this is less likely is because I don't think that would cause the SERVERBLIGHT to follow him. The more likely of the two is that the SERVERBLIGHT let him disconnect just so he could learn how to leave the server and presumably spread to other servers. Hence why it said thank you after he disconnected. Also, speaking of the SERVERBLIGHT disconnecting, I have a bit of an interesting theory with this scene. I have a bit of a feeling that the order of the players to disconnect here might be related in some way to the order of the people that have been assimilated by the SERVERBLIGHT. Now hold on, let me cook. I got two main reasons why I feel this way. My first reason being that the first player to disconnect was an assimilated medic. And as we see in both the empty server and migration, the only merc that we've heard doing something other than screaming and crying for help is the medic. So that almost more than likely means that whoever this medic is was probably the origin or patient zero of the SERVERBLIGHT. Now, the other reason why I feel the order of the players that disconnect has to do with the order of the players getting assimilated is because of the last three players that disconnect: Direction Z, Gayfer, and Gillysuit. Now, we know who Direction Z and Gillysuit are, but who's Gayfer? Well, it's probably the heavy Dixalot saw despawn. Think about it. Let's say the SERVERBLIGHT was waiting in the spawn room for people to respawn. Dixalot snipes Direction Z, he can't disconnect even though he's dead, and is forced to respawn right where the SERVERBLIGHT is waiting for him. Now, we see that this heavy has died recently, since we see his ragdoll and there's the ammo pickup next to his body. And even though his death wasn't in the kill feed, there's definitely time in between Dixalot walking from spawn and the area with the heavy's body, so we could assume he died during that travel time. Now, once again, much like Direction Z, the heavy who's presumably Gayfer couldn't disconnect even though he died, so he respawns and suffers the exact same fate as Direction Z. And then of course, we know Ghillie was the last one to be taken, since he game-ended himself right before Dixalot disconnected. So assuming my theory is correct, then we also know he's potentially the patient zero of the SERVERBLIGHT. That being someone going by the name The Real Kid. But that's just a theory! A game theory! Okay, but on a more serious note, when I saw this installment, I wholeheartedly thought at the time that this was the end of the series. A dumb free-to-play somehow managing to accidentally save all the victims of the SERVERBLIGHT by pressing Alt F4. But oh how wrong I was. Things are about to get a whole lot more sinister in the next installment, just titled SERVERBLIGHT. This is definitely one of the more interesting ones to me, as it's a bit of a slow burn compared to the other installments we've seen up until this point. This installment opens immediately with a proper typical TF2 interaction. The enemy team capping a point, and a Greaselord Pyro BMing after killing a medic, named Hectoron. Also much like a typical TF2 game, the medic Hectoron, real name Matt, feels the need to narrate every single damn thing through his mic, where he tells his friend Dixalot, real name Aaron, to play Soldier. Now, for the sake of simplicity, for the rest of the video, I'll be referring to these guys by their real names. Cause you got me fucked up if you think I'm going to be saying Dixalot for the rest of the damn video. After Aaron switches to Soldier, we see an intense, normal TF2 game. And holy shit, Aaron sucks hot ass at Soldier. How has he not gotten a single kill? Finally, Jesus Christ! Okay, yeah, even Matt realized Aaron sucks ass at this game and decides to just pocket the free-to-play heavy who absolutely mows down the enemy team, eventually leading the team to victory. Also, totally unrelated side note, but I seriously gotta stop and glaze this series real quick. I absolutely love the cinematography and camera work in these scenes, and in the series in general. Like, not to sound like a total nerd, but as someone who's currently studying film, it brings me such joy to see like textbook examples of camera shots and film techniques I've learned in school used in the series. Like, the use of the handheld shot technique during these action shots are just, mwah, chef's kiss. Okay, sorry for nerding out so hard, back to the spooky stuff. After Aaron learns how to killbind and Matt whines about how they only have one teammate and they should just play casual, suddenly a bunch of people join the game. More specifically, the SERVERBLIGHT. Notably, the first one joined was none other than Johnny Danny, which confirms that the SERVERBLIGHT managed to latch onto him right as he left the Thunder Mountain game. However, there's also some new names, implying that the SERVERBLIGHT has been terrorizing multiple servers in between this installment and Migration. After noticing Ghillie joining the game, Aaron freaks out and says they need to leave immediately. But of course, neither of them are able to disconnect. And despite Aaron's panicking, Matt reassures him that in the worst case scenario, they'll just Alt F4. And they ultimately decide to try and win the game to show what Matt assumes are hackers who's boss. So, after getting the lone heavy on their team, Scuba Master, to agree to the plan, they all roll out, only to discover that the entire server is totally empty despite Red Team being full. Once Aaron and Matt capture the first point, Matt notices a scout running up some stairs and decides to run after him with his Uber Saw for some Uber. Is he stupid? A medic wielding an Uber Saw would easily lose a 1v1 with the scout. Not only that, he's extra stupid for this because the scout seems a little bit familiar. Our suspicions are confirmed when we see in the kill feed that the scout he chased after was none other than Direction Z, the scout that we saw from the first installment. Regardless, Matt still seemed to get the kill, and presumably some Uber. And right as Aaron checks on him, they both hear someone shooting a shotgun. Despite this, they decide to keep pushing the payload, and once they hear the shotgun again, they decide to check up on Scuba Master. Though, right after deciding this, Aaron looks off in the distance and sees the deformed body of the scout Matt killed, running towards the third point. After Matt notices Aaron staring for too long, he snaps him out of it and encourages him to keep moving. Once they make it to the caves, they find Scuba Master eerily staying still, and once Matt calls out to him, Scuba Master ends up repeating what he said at the start of the match. Not only that, but we also see something pretty disturbing that we haven't seen until now. A hand sliding into Scuba Master's mouth, almost as if there's something now living inside of Scuba Master. Also, an interesting detail I think is worth noting here is that once the hand goes fully inside Scuba Master, his messages in the chat say that he's dead. Well, regardless, after the hand goes down Scuba Master's throat, he begins chasing after the two while screaming for help and yelling at them to run. And right as he has the two cornered, Aaron quickly calls for a vote kick on Scuba Master. And right before he catches them, the vote gets passed and Scuba Master is kicked. After that near-death experience, Aaron tells Matt that they need to jump in the pit on final to escape from the game. So they ultimately decide to stop trying to cap, and instead make a mad dash for the last point. On their way over there, they see a demo man bashing his head against the wall, and right as Matt is about to attack him with his Uber Saw, Aaron stops him, saying it's a trap. So the two keep moving on towards last. As they pass Red Team spawn, they end up finding none other than Johnny Danny outside laying in the snow, delirious and unaware of his surroundings. Although most of him is lying outside, we see his leg is stretched all the way to inside spawn, where we see an unsettling red light emanating from inside. Feeling bad for the free-to-play, Aaron decides to put him out of his misery. But right as he's about to shoot, we discover it's another trap, and the SERVERBLIGHT starts to leave Red Team spawn. Aaron then immediately realizes his mistake, and both his fight and flight instinct kicks in, where he shoots at the SERVERBLIGHT before running like hell. Also, why does Matt Loki just not give a shit about the Eldritch abomination that's emerging from Red Team spawn? He's just kinda standing there. Weird. Well, regardless, the duo start running like hell, and that bait demo also joins in on the chase, though Aaron blasts him pretty easily. Jeez, Aaron, why couldn't you have that kind of accuracy during the match before this? Interestingly enough, after blowing the demo apart, the SERVERBLIGHT stops his pursuit of the duo, and seems to drag the Gibbs of the demo away, presumably to rebuild him. Once the duo are in a safe spot, Aaron reflects on what just happened, realizing he just fell for bait, and that the SERVERBLIGHT's learning. And, weirdly enough, all Matt can say in response is just,
"What?"
in the exact same tone of voice, in the exact same way. Wait a minute. Aaron also mentions that the SERVERBLIGHT pretends to be a player, and repeats the exact same voice lines as heard. And once again, all Matt can say in response is,
"What?"
Realizing something feels off here, Aaron turns around, only to make the horrifying discovery that Matt's voice icon isn't aligned with his player model. After signally noticing Aaron staring above him, Matt, or rather, the thing pretending to be Matt, looks up and discovers its slip-up, and finally drops the facade. Although initially horrified by this revelation, Aaron's survival instincts kick in, and he makes a mad dash for the pit on final, where he ends up successfully rocket jumping into it. After apologizing to Matt, Aaron then disconnects, where we see a partial shot from inside the Red Team spawn, where we hear all the victims of the SERVERBLIGHT screaming. Notably, we also see the red pirate that is running towards Aaron while he's making his mad dash to the pit, running back towards spawn. I feel like this could mean that he's going back to add himself back to the main master of the SERVERBLIGHT. The installment then ends with the thing wearing Matt's body retracting its fingers and mouth hand, and having a sinister grin at the sight of new players joining the game. Sheesh, what a loaded episode. You know, something I really liked about this episode is just how reminiscent this installment feels to the 1987 film Predator. In case any of you aren't familiar with this film, basically, much like this installment of SERVERBLIGHT, the film ends up misleading you, making you think it's going to be a testosterone-pumping action film. However, after the initial war film action scenes, it quickly turns into a horror film as the GIs get plucked off one by the Predator. Yeah, I know, here comes a film student yapping about films for the umpteenth time. But like, can you blame me? It's a storytelling element that I seriously don't see that often in media, and I really fuck with it so heavy. So hell yeah, I'm gonna absolutely glaze it when I see it, but I'm getting a bit sidetracked. As I said at the end of the last section, this one is much more sinister than the previous installments, and we can definitely see it in the form of the SERVERBLIGHT stringing Aaron along, pretending to be Matt for such a long period of time. Assuming you already saw the series on your own before watching my analysis of the series, if you're paying attention, after killing Direction Z with the Zuber Saw, Matt was only saying things that he said on the mic after the SERVERBLIGHT joined the game. Here, let's compare some of the instances of when Matt says something over the mic and when Blight Matt says something.
"Yo, Heavy, you with us? Yo, Heavy. Aaron, you good? Aaron? What? Didn't you say... What? What the fuck? Why can't I leave? Stop, dude!
Now, this last clip is both extremely concerning, but also extremely noteworthy for multiple reasons. Obviously, one of the most concerning things is how the SERVERBLIGHT now learned to use voice chat, and we can even see it figure out how to create new phrases using the voice chat within the very short period of time it's had using it. The main example of this being when Blight Matt says, "can't leave." Matt never actually said the term "can't leave" during the time he was himself. However, he did say,
What the fuck? Why can't I leave?
Which means that the SERVERBLIGHT has learned to string together words to create new phrases. Also, while we're talking about Blight Matt, I find it very strange that the SERVERBLIGHT decided to string Aaron along for so long, making him think that Matt was himself. I'm having a bit of a hard time trying to figure out why it didn't just let Scuba Master get him, or just get Aaron himself when he wasn't looking. My best theory as to why this is that the SERVERBLIGHT gets some kind of sick kick out of causing terror and psychologically screwing with its victims. And honestly, it also seems like it still screws with its victims even when they're a part of it, as we saw with Johnny Danny being used as bait. Well, yes, ultimately he was just bait, and there's definitely a non-0% possibility that it was just a SERVERBLIGHT pretending to be Johnny Danny. However, I'm of the belief that this is really Johnny Danny talking, and that he's in a state of delirium likely due to the SERVERBLIGHT attaching itself to him. When we get to the next installment, it's going to heavily back up this point of mine, but we still have more to analyze and break down here, so hang on for just a moment. There's like 2 or 3 more things I really want to focus on in this installment before we move on. One of the more notable developments of the SERVERBLIGHT is that it no longer seems to be staying as a single writhing mass anymore. And what I mean by this is that up until this installment, the SERVERBLIGHT has remained as one single clump of players. but now it seems to use players sort of like drones now, as we've seen with players like Direction Z or the demo hitting his head against the wall. Although it's not totally explained how this works, something tells me that the hand inside the mouths of Matt and Scuba Master has something to do with it. And speaking of Scuba Master, the sequence of his final moments are a bit interesting to me, for two main reasons. The first reason being that it's very interesting to me how the moment he has his hand fully go into his mouth, his messages in the chat say that he's dead. I know this is a relatively small thing, and is ultimately probably a bit insignificant to the overarching story and lore of the SERVERBLIGHT, but I'm curious if this means that the moment the hand went fully inside Scuba Master's mouth, that's the exact moment the person behind Scuba Master had died, and that the SERVERBLIGHT had fully taken over. I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments if you think I'm right, which I always am, or if I'm reading a bit too much into the small detail. Now, as for the second reason why Scuba Master's final moments are very interesting to me, are in regards to him being vote kicked. As we already know, by this point, Matt is already won with the SERVERBLIGHT, so then why would he vote yes to the vote kick? Honestly, I think that the most likely reason is that as nice as it would be to assimilate Aaron, the SERVERBLIGHT is also smart enough to think ahead, and that kicking Scuba Master would make him another catalyst to spread the SERVERBLIGHT to even more servers. I guess we'll just have to wait and find out, but holy crap was there a lot to unpack in this installment. The next installment is actually one of the 2 installments to make up the technically 7 installments remark I made earlier in the video. I actually almost skipped over this one because it's titled differently from every other video in the playlist, so I sort of assumed this was accidentally added, but boy how wrong I was. The next installment in the series is Puppet, a Team Fortress 2 creepypasta. But before we get into the next installment, I'm going to kill the entire flow of this video by thanking today's sponsor, me! Yeah, I just want to remind you all to drop a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far. I mean, hey, you've watched this far into the video, so it's gotta mean you enjoyed it at least a little bit, right? And also, hey, while I got your attention, be sure to check out my Twitter and Discord server to keep up to date with my upcoming video projects and my random thoughts I throw into the void. Please, my Discord server is so dead. I'm begging you here. And the last thing I'll show before we get back into the video is that I got channel memberships! Members get the benefit of getting to see all my videos for days early, access to unique emojis, and access to exclusive community posts with in-depth updates on my upcoming videos. So consider being a member today. It helps out both me and the channel a ton. Okay, back to the video. Oh, also, once again, subscribe. Please? Unlike the previous installments, there really isn't much in regards to visuals for Puppet. It's mostly just gradual zooming out of what seems to be a sniper who is assimilated into the SERVERBLIGHT, surrounded by multiple other bodies of people that have been assimilated, including Matt and Direction Z. This installment is a description of what all the people assimilated by the SERVERBLIGHT are experiencing from the POV of the sniper. From the sniper's POV, he seems to have lost most of his memories, including what happened right before he got assimilated. The only thing he can see is darkness, and when he calls out, he realizes his voice isn't his. And when he tries to move, he realizes he's stuck in some soft room. Suddenly, he feels a hand starting to dig into his neck, and when he tries to move his arms, he realizes he's all deformed, with his right arm being too long, and his left arm being on the wrong side of his body. As time goes on, the hand digging into his neck starts to hurt more, as he feels a knee jab into his torso, and cold breath on his hand. Now, remember how I said that I'm pretty sure that when Johnny Danny was outside his spawn being used as bait, that I was pretty sure it was him talking and not the SERVERBLIGHT talking? Well, the sniper comes to the realization that he's freezing cold. And when Aaron encountered Johnny Danny, he mentions that he was so cold. So this means that either the people assimilated by the SERVERBLIGHT feel cold for some reason, or maybe it's got something to do with them playing on Snowy Coast. A map that, if you were in it in real life, you would probably also freeze your ass off. And I know the sniper is currently on Snowy Coast because of how this installment ends. Anyways, once the main mass of bodies hits the ground, everyone collectively cries out in pain, including the sniper. The sniper then sees a hole in the mass of the bodies he's in, and comes to the terrifying realization that he's in TF2. Now that he's been given more visibility, he discovers the gravity of the situation he's in, and sees a mass of red clothes and stretched skin all around him. As they move, he feels his body being rearranged against his will. And once the mass encounters a spy, he feels both the blight prodding at his mind, trying to force him to scream with everyone else, as well as something smiling behind his head. And while he tries to resist the prodding, he feels said entity smiling wider, like it enjoys him helplessly resisting. Then, as almost some kind of punishment for resisting, he feels what can only be described as a million pixels burning him all at once, forcing him to scream. We're then quickly shown the screen faces of several of the assimilated players, many of whom we the viewers can recognize, those being the demo who's hitting his head against the wall, Direction Z, Johnny Danny, our protagonist Sniper, and Matt. The only two I don't recognize is a pyro with a beanie and a default heavy. We're then shown a shot of Snowy Coast, with the SERVERBLIGHT leaving the server. Unfortunately, unlike the other installments, I admittedly don't have much to say about this one, mostly because everything was already spelled out for us for this episode. Regardless though, there are a few things I'd like to talk about from this episode. First and foremost, who even is our protagonist for this installment? Well, I think my best guess would be one of the people that joined the game at the end of the last episode. More specifically, the one named Headshot Fraudster. I don't think I need to explain why I think this is our protagonist. The name is pretty on the nose. Another thing I want to touch on real quick is, who is this Heavy and Pyro? The fact they're shown here means they've got to hold some kind of significance, right? Hey, so, Future Marcy here. After rewatching the installment called SERVERBLIGHT while editing this video, I'm starting to realize that this pyro is probably Drain Damage, the pyro that told Matt to KYS, though I still have no clue who this Heavy is. Now, the last thing I want to briefly mention is the thing behind the protagonist sniper that was described as smiling. Well, yes, I'm almost certain this presence is almost definitely the SERVERBLIGHT. I'm not really sure what it means that he felt it smiling behind his head. Does he mean it in a physical way or a metaphysical way? Well, maybe we can find an answer to that question in the next installment, Assimilation. Now, before we get into the installment, I should preface it by saying that this installment has some flashing lights in it, so if you have epilepsy, or are just generally sensitive to flashing lights, skip to the timestamp on screen or go to the next chapter in the video. With that out of the way, this installment opens similarly to the one titled SERVERBLIGHT, and by that, I mean it starts off by showing a normal TF2 game on Dust Bowl. As the camera pans over all the action, the camera eventually makes it to Blue Team spawn, where we end up seeing the POV of the protagonist of this episode, a spy named Cyrenix. But not only that, we actually also get to see real life for the first time in the series, where we get to see Cyrenix in real life. And also, total side note, but where the fuck is he gaming from? Bro's gaming inside of a damn prison cell, what the hell, man? Okay, but on a more serious note, after sitting down, Cyrenix starts playing the game as normal, but right as he's getting ready to backstab the enemy medic, he hears something behind him and looks away, which ends up getting him blown up. Bro is literally throwing the game, he could have easily gotten that medic. It's also worth noting here that Cyrenix feels a bit chilly after hearing that noise, which might be related to the SERVERBLIGHT being nearby. Well, either that, or maybe it's because he's gaming in a fucking concrete basement! Once he respawns, we see someone in the chat say, "This is weird." And when Cyrenix gets behind enemy lines, he notices something feels wrong about the enemy team. And what I mean by that is that it seems like everyone's just sort of pretending to play the game. The engineer's mindlessly hitting a dispenser without any metal, the medic has zero survival instinct, and the heavy's just sort of mindlessly revving and shooting his minigun at nobody while thoughtlessly jumping in and out of cover. Though admittedly, I've totally seen this happen many times before, so maybe I'm just reading a little too into this. Cyrenix suddenly gets snapped out of his staring when he hears something behind him again, though this time it's in-game. However, when he turns around, he just sees a sniper, though it sort of feels like he can see Cyrenix despite him being invisible. After moving on behind enemy lines, Cyrenix looks behind him in real life, and although he doesn't see anything, I notice that the shadow here looks different than when we saw it earlier. What it means? I have no clue, because neither of these shadows are really that discernible. Once he stabs the enemy medic, he glances down at his hands, where he notices for just a moment that his hands are the spy's hands. Not only that, but when he starts getting weirded out, he feels someone touch his shoulder, where we see the heavy's hand touching his shoulder. However, when Cyrenix turns around in game, he sees a soldier watching him, who quickly backs off. Feeling weirded out, Cyrenix returns to the first point, and that's when he sees everyone on both teams staring at him, despite being invisible. And in response, he makes whatever the hell these faces are. Oh, and the heavy's just casually chilling behind him too. After realizing that they can all see him, they all start chasing after him. However, he gets cornered when the soldier he saw earlier starts running at him from the other end of the choke point. So, in haste, he runs into a tunnel behind him, where he tries to futilely disconnect. And when he looks to his side, the room he's in has turned into the tunnel on Dust Bowl. Honestly, his room probably doesn't look much different now than it did before. Realizing the SERVERBLIGHT is still in hot pursuit of him, he keeps running, where he then comes to the decision that he's gotta capture the last point. So, when he makes it to the point, he steps on it, and an enemy is blocking his capture. Confused, Cyrenix looks around, unable to find anyone, until he sees on the ground an elongated thumb stretching out from spawn. And the player that this thumb ends up belonging to is none other than Scuba Master 96. Frozen in shock, Cyrenix can only watch in horror as Scuba Master slowly emerges from spawn, as all the other assimilated players catch up to him, all the while the heavy's hands reach towards Cyrenix in real life. Now, what happens here is a bit hard for me to discern because of all the flashing glitch effects, but I think we end up seeing something pry open Cyrenix's mouth in real life and force a hand down his throat. As we see Cyrenix's player model distort more and more as hands reach out to him, this chaotic scene suddenly ends, where we see Cyrenix's lifeless body, with glossy eyes and blood coming out of his mouth. After that, the episode ends. Wow, so we finally get to see what it's like for a person in the real world to get assimilated by the SERVERBLIGHT. And honestly, it definitely raises way more questions than answers. So let's first discuss everything we learned about in regards to the real person getting assimilated before we get into the various other aspects in-game that I want to discuss. First and foremost, one of the things I feel like is worth noting here is the physical manifestation of the heavy in real life. Or at least, the metaphysical manifestation of it. Jesus Christ, I sound like a total nerd saying that. Throughout this entire installment, we see the metaphysical heavy toying with Cyrenix. From making vocalizations behind him to touching him, it seems like the SERVERBLIGHT isn't satisfied with just terrorizing people in-game. And speaking of this heavy, something else that has me a bit curious is the shadow changing behind Cyrenix. Now, I admit, I could totally be focusing on absolutely nothing other than a small oversight by the creators, but I'd like to think that this shadow has something to do with the heavy. The only question being, what does it have to do with him? Neither of these shadows really resemble much of anything, but what do you think? Am I reading too much into it, or am I onto something here? Now, the last thing I want to bring up in regards to the heavy is, well, the heavy itself. Although it very easily could be just a random mercenary chosen by the creators, I feel like the heavy has some sort of significance here. My only real theory as to why it's specifically heavy has to do with the fact that Scuba Master is here. Maybe because Scuba Master is sort of the progenitor of the SERVERBLIGHT here, then maybe that's why the manifestation of the SERVERBLIGHT that attacks Cyronyx is a heavy. Also, this definitely backs up my theory from the installment title SERVERBLIGHT that by kicking Scuba Master, the SERVERBLIGHT can spread to more servers, since now he's moving the servers independently from the mass from Thunder Mountain. One last thing I'd like to talk about in regards to these real life scenes, and this doesn't have anything to do with the plot at all, but like, I'm really impressed by how the creators managed to make Cyronyx look, well, dead. Okay, wait, I just realized that sounds really fucked up to say out loud. Okay, but look, I guess what I mean here is that I'm really intrigued by how they managed to make his eyes look all glossy and empty. Like, either they had to edit his eyes to look glossy, which I think is really impressive, or they had to do some sort of costume work by putting some sort of contacts in his eyes, which I also think is really cool. Hey, leave me alone. I'm a film nerd. Special effects and costume work are some of the coolest things to me. Alright, enough glazing for now. Let's talk about some of the in-game details we see in this installment. I think one of the most noteworthy things here is how the SERVERBLIGHT learned how to pretend to play the game. Albeit, not very well, but it's honestly kind of disturbing me that the SERVERBLIGHT seem to have the entire red team pretend to be playing the game just to screw with Cyronyx. Not only that, but the SERVERBLIGHT is even making fake conversations with itself to sell the illusion of player interactions. Something else I found to be interesting here is how the SERVERBLIGHT is now able to see invisible spies. See, the reason why I say it's now able to see invisible spies is that I'm fairly certain it wasn't able to before. If we go way back to the empty server, we see the spy named Brodolphin uncloak before jumping off the cliff. So that could mean that Brodolphin evaded the SERVERBLIGHT on Thunder Mountain by cloaking. But then, why was he able to sneak away from it back then, but now the SERVERBLIGHT is seemingly well aware of cloaked spies? I mean, the answer should be pretty obvious. It's learning at such an exponential rate that it's probably figured out some way to see invisible spies. Now, the last thing I want to point out here is something I feel like could be very easily overlooked, and that's the map. Now, what specifically about the map? Well, it's Dust Bowl. Tell me, do you know any out-of-bounds kill zones on this map? Because I sure don't. For the SERVERBLIGHT, this map is practically just shooting fish in a barrel. There is quite literally no way for anyone to be able to escape this map. Or is there? Hey, Vsauce, Marcy here. No, I'm not bringing this bit back. It wasn't funny the first time. Okay, but on a more serious note, there is technically at least one way out of the map, but I'll get to that later in the video. Though, actually, now that I think about it, would winning or losing a game lead to a way out? Like, now I'm curious if Cyronyx did manage to capture last. Would he have been able to disconnect? Or the same could go for if he managed to hold out for the eternity that's Dust Bowl Part 3. I wonder if maybe the creators will explore this idea in the future. Who knows? Well, speaking of future installments, I think that's all I have to say for this episode. So, let's move on to the next one. That one being Offline. This episode is actually the second of the 2 installments to make up the technically 7 installments remark I made earlier in the video. Mostly because this was originally a teaser for the as of currently writing the script, latest installment in the series, Reflection. However, this teaser actually does some really nice world building, where we're introduced to a new character named Classic. It appears that the server is a very tight-knit community, where pretty much everyone knows everyone. We see Classic doing his rounds on the server, saying hi to all the regulars and stopping a scout from capping, before he notices one of the regulars, Spoogs, just staring at him from afar. Regardless, he seems to continue doing his rounds, where we see him talking with one of the server regulars who's talking about practically scamming someone, and Classic once again notices Spoogs staring at him. But when he mentions it, the guy Classic was talking to says that Spoogs hasn't been on since yesterday. So Classic decides to pursue Spoogs, and in his pursuit, he sees something, I don't know. So normally I break down all my theories and details I noticed during this installment, but like, what is there for me to analyze here? I guess the main thing to bring up is really just a map, that being Sawmill, another map with no out-of-bounds areas. It's starting to seem like to me that the SERVERBLIGHT is strictly going to maps with no out-of-bounds areas, which is honestly very concerning. Although, what if it's just a map that needs to kill you? If that's the case, then the Sawmills would be a very easy way to game end yourself and escape. However, if it doesn't work like that, then yeah, everyone in this game is screwed. So let's see what happens in the next and final installment for the time being, Reflection. This episode opens seemingly where we left off on Sawmill, and we see someone join the game who we haven't seen in a very long time, Brodolphin. Yeah, that's right, the spy way back on Thunder Mountain that walked off the cliff. Here we get faked out a little bit by briefly thinking that the server's empty, until Brodolphin gets suddenly blasted apart by a demo man. And oh my god, ew, this guy's using the dead ringer, ew! Though, honestly, the demo kinda deserved it. He was being a prick for no reason. Much like the past couple of installments in the series, we see that this is a normal game in TF2, where you get to see just how much of a sweatlord Bradolphin is at spot. Uh-oh. I see we're just getting straight into it then, huh? If you remember, Headshot Fraudster is one of the people that joined the Snowy Coast game right after Aaron left the game. I wonder how long it'll take for the SERVERBLIGHT to make itself known. After being such a goddamn sweat and hitting a nasty trick stab, we then see a scout staring at him. Very unsettlingly. Oh, never mind. Just a normal TF2 interaction. Oh my god, this guy is such a typical spy mate. My blood is boiling just watching this. Anyways, after hitting that trick stab in the demo night, we see the demo from offline again, where he compliments Bradolphin's trick stab. Here, the two have a chill conversation, where Bradolphin tells him about someone who's been messaging him a lot lately, and Classic telling him to just block the guy. After the short conversation, Classic says he's gotta get off, but as expected, he can't log off. And disturbingly, we see a very unsettling zoom out shot where we see a deformed sniper hand slowly reaching over Classic's head. And I don't know why, but something so eerie about the scene for me is just how silent it is when Classic gets grabbed by the sniper. Like, there's no screaming, no cries for help, not even really any sounds of a struggle or ragdoll collisions. Of course, after that, Bradolphin runs for it, and all hell starts breaking loose, where we see the SERVERBLIGHT attacking various players. Not only that, but we also see a couple familiar names join the game, Ghillie and Sirenix. It's honestly kind of freaky that the SERVERBLIGHT has now learned how to send individual Blighted players to a server. Though, why did it send Ghillie and Sirenix? You'd think the SERVERBLIGHT would have already had everything under control already with Headshot Fraudster, Spoogs, and whoever this medic is. And before you go in the comments and say that this is Matt, it's not, because if you look at their hats, they don't match up. Regardless, we see Bradolphin seemingly have a mini panic attack, where he ends up accidentally letting himself get cornered by an assimilated scout. But before the scout could reach him, Bradolphin is saved last second by none other than Dixalot, better known as Aaron. After saving him, it's revealed that Aaron was the one messaging Bradolphin, and when Bradolphin doesn't seem to understand, he gets reminded of the Thunder Mountain game, which seems to freak him out a bit. Aaron then gives Bradolphin a bit of a pep talk, where he implies he somehow figured out a method to make it out of the map, despite there being no out-of-bounds areas. As they keep moving, Bradolphin looks into some water and notices a reflection, which kinda causes him to have a bit of an existential crisis, asking how they can move like they do in real life, though Aaron doesn't have much useful to say in response. Hey, wait a minute, how could Bradolphin see his reflection? TF2 doesn't have water reflection mechanics. And, just like that, his supposed reflection's gone. Actually, wait a minute, his reflection didn't even match up with Bradolphin. He has an ambassador, while the reflection has the default revolver. And Bradolphin has whatever the hell this hat's called, while the reflection kinda seems like it's wearing some kind of beret. I could've sworn we've seen this loadout somewhere before. Oh shit. After Bradolphin runs away like a coward, the assimilated Sirenix runs out of the water towards Aaron. And what the fuck? Is it strafing away from his rockets? Well, despite strafing, Aaron's improved his aim a lot since the Snowy Coast game, and shoots Sirenix dead. We then get a shot of Sirenix as Ragdoll, and I know I could totally be reading too much into this again, but it's kinda odd to me how much Sirenix's Ragdoll is posed exactly like how his lifeless body is posed in real life. Could just be a coincidence, or maybe it could mean something. Either way, I'm not really sure. After Aaron deals with Sirenix, he yells at Bradolphin, accidentally calling him Bredophile. And in response, Bradolphin apologizes. It's very apparent that he isn't handling this well and is scared to all high hell right now. Suddenly, Aaron sees a huge sniper hand dragging Sirenix away, and the plan changes now, and they need to go through mid to get to spawn. And in response, Bradolphin asks something I actually didn't really consider until now. But that's how Aaron's managing to type so quickly, which he responds by saying it's binds. Now, admittedly, I was going to roll with the theory I saw in the comments of this video that Aaron is sort of channeling his bind to the game to speak what he's thinking, but after watching through this again, you can tell what is and isn't a phrase Aaron's bound to his keyboard. The biggest giveaway is the sentence having capitalization and punctuation. So this definitely means that Aaron has more than likely dealt with the SERVERBLIGHT so many times at this point that he has a total list of phrases at the ready to save people's lives when he has a run-in. This also more than likely means that he's been actively seeking out the SERVERBLIGHT. Once they move to the center of the map with the control point, Bradolphin suggests capping the point, though Aaron also brings up a good point that'd be too slow. And besides, we all remember what happened last time someone tried capping the point against the SERVERBLIGHT. Suddenly, the two hear an engineer cry for help, and after a couple moments, we see Ghillie slowly walking towards the two. And attached to him is a forever screaming Classic. What makes this more unsettling is that it doesn't even seem like the SERVERBLIGHT wants to get them here per se. More so terrorize them by showing off its newest victim that it's tormenting. Like, it's not even running at them, just slowly walking at them while smiling. And this theory of mine, I think, is reinforced when Ghillie stops right in front of a saw blade, where Classic gets constantly shredded by said saw blade. The thing that makes the scene extra chilling is when he starts getting shredded by the saw, Classic's mic turns on, where we can hear the player behind Classic screaming. Realizing the danger they're in, Bradolphin contemplates running out the door, but Aaron has a better but riskier idea, and that's to launch him onto the upper platform with a rocket. And, lucky for Bradolphin, none of them screw it up. Honestly, if I were in this situation, it would not matter who I am, I'd either fuck up the aiming of the rocket, or I'd fuck up the crouch jump. So, good on them for not fumbling there. Once they both make it up, the duo make a mad dash for spawn, until they notice something lurking around the corner, so they quickly divert their path. And once they're in a relatively safe spot, they have a conversation about the SERVERBLIGHT and the people it's assimilated. Once Aaron mentions the assimilation of Matt, Bradolphin drops a total bombshell on Aaron. That being his best friend was in the Thunder Mountain game with them. And his name? Direction Z. Aaron ends up bold-faced lying to Bradolphin when he gets asked if he's seen Direction Z, saying he hasn't seen him, even though he's the one who doomed Direction Z by sniping him, and saw Matt get assimilated by him. Suddenly, their conversation gets interrupted when they hear footsteps right above them. And that's when Bradolphin seems to hatch a plan. He wants Aaron to shoot him so he respawns back at Blue Team spawn. So, following his request, Aaron shoots Bradolphin with his reserve shooter. However, this may have been a huge mistake, because right after, an assimilated pyro starts reaching down, either to get Bradolphin's body, or to get Aaron now that he's isolated. However, we see what Bradolphin's real plan was, and we see how him being a fat fucking spy main pays off, where we discover he was using a dead ringer the whole time. And, catching the assimilated pyro off guard, he domes him with his ambassador. Now that the two are temporarily safe, Aaron reveals his plan to Bradolphin on how to get out, and that's going soldier and launching his ragdoll out of the map. So there is a way to escape the SERVERBLIGHT without using an outbounds kill zone. Suddenly, their conversation gets cut short again, this time with Classic seemingly separated from Gillysuit, groaning into his mic, watching the two from afar. Interestingly enough, once Bradolphin's dead ringer ragdoll disappears, Classic decides to walk away. It's almost like the SERVERBLIGHT's drawn to ragdolls of unassimilated players. After Bradolphin makes it back to Aaron as a soldier now, Aaron reiterates his instructions, emphasizing that he should not give himself when trying to get out. So, with that, Bradolphin starts getting himself low in health, and once he's low enough, he gets a go-ahead from Aaron. So, he runs towards the fence, and he gives himself. Because of this massive fuck-up, the giant sniper starts making his way to them, and we get to see just how goddamn gargantuan the sniper is. Thankfully, Bradolphin just in the nick of time manages to get it right the second time around, and makes it out of bounds while Aaron kills the sniper. And once Bradolphin disconnects, Aaron notices the hand inside the sniper's mouth stop moving, and also sees Gillysuit watching him from afar. After the two share a rivalrous look, Aaron then also launches himself out of bounds. Once the scene cuts to black, we see a Steam message conversation between the two survivors, where Aaron tries to recruit Bradolphin into stopping the SERVERBLIGHT. However, despite wanting to see his friend again, Bradolphin declines the request, and demands that Aaron never message him again. We then see a shot of Aaron in real life, seeming to have a breakdown after getting shut down like this. The camera then pans to his phone, where we see that Aaron has hopelessly texted and called Matt several times to no avail. Also, something I think is worth noting here, is that there's a book next to Aaron's phone, called Dark Imperium Godblight. Now, I feel like this holds some sort of significance to the overarching story somehow, as the word Godblight really stands out to me. After doing some quick research, this is a Warhammer 40k book. Now, sadly, I never played Warhammer 40k, much less read any of the Warhammer books. And as awesome as it would be for me to go the extra length to read this book to find its connection to the video, I'm just not gonna do that. However, if any of you have read the book or are familiar with Warhammer 40k, please enlighten me on if this book holds any relevance to the SERVERBLIGHT lore, or if it's just me focusing way too much on decoration. Either way, something I want to point out that is definitely not me harping on something that may or may not be there, is a shot that zooms out on Aaron quietly sobbing, where we see an unmistakable shadow of an arm behind him, meaning the SERVERBLIGHT is definitely still keeping an eye on him. Then, the scene cuts to black. However, there's actually one last thing left that I feel like many people miss because they assume the video's over. Do you remember way back at the start of this installment when Bradolphin trick-stabbed the soldier, and there's that scout that kill-binded right after seeing that happen? Well, it turns out that scout Sailorman managed to survive the massacre that took place on Sawmill. And we actually see this absolute rat gamer make it to spawn safely, switch to soldier, and launch himself out of the map. I'm honestly hoping that maybe we'll see Sailorman show up later in the series. And with that, the video ends. Well, this installment was incredibly loaded, and there's a lot for us to analyze and break down for this as of now final installment of the series. Honestly, I don't even know where to start with my analysis. So let's start in chronological order here, starting with Headshot Fraudster joining the game. Now, you might not notice it, but this is a very subtle but also very disturbing detail about how the SERVERBLIGHT's evolving. As this time, it's a player that was part of the central mass of the SERVERBLIGHT joining the game on its own, and not someone like Scuba Master who's technically never part of the main mass. And how do I know that Headshot Fraudster was a part of the central mass? Well, let's look all the way back at the Puppet Creepypasta. Here, we came to the conclusion that the story was from the perspective of Headshot Fraudster. And if you're paying attention, the sniper in Reflection reinforces the idea that the sniper in Puppet was Headshot Fraudster, as both this sniper and the sniper inside the SERVERBLIGHT are both wearing the same outfits. Although it might be hard to notice because, unfortunately, he just wears a very generic looking jacket. but when we compare the shoulders and zipper thing both the snipers have, they both seem to line up. And actually, speaking of Scuba Master, I know it might seem a bit odd to bring him up again since he doesn't even show up here, but I actually have a bit of a theory about the first assimilated players to join the server. We know the Headshot Fraudster was the first assimilated player to join the server, and before you even think about typing in the comments, but what about Spoogs? In the teaser, Spoogs is clearly assimilated. And to that I say, maybe that was the initial plan, but I feel like part of Offline isn't canon. And the biggest reason I believe that is Classic's reaction to seeing something not shown to the viewers. If it was canon, then it's really weird how casual and chill he is when interacting with Bradolphin. So, with that out of the way, we know the Headshot Fraudster was the first assimilated player to join on the server. And even though we've seen how deformed some of the assimilated players can be, it's a bit unusual just how big Headshot Fraudster is. Now, what does this have to do with Scuba Master? Well, back in the installment titled Assimilation, when Scuba Master was slowly emerging from spawn, look how fucking gigantic he is. Now sure, we don't get to see his full body, but if just the size of his head and hands are any sort of indication of how big his full body is, he's probably massive. Now, seeing as the relevant common traits between these two are that they're the first assimilated players in these servers, and that they're unusually gigantic, then I feel like there has to be some correlation there with them being the first ones on the server and their size. Now, as to why they're so large, your guess is as good as mine. Though, if I had to make an educated guess, then either A, they're huge like this to sort of imitate the central SERVERBLIGHT mass that we see on Thunder Mountain and Snowy Coast, or B, their size lets them collect dead bodies so they can, quote, fix them, as we see with Headshot Fraudster grabbing Cyrenix, or hell, even the central mass stopping his pursuit of Aaron and Matt to drag away the Gibbs of the Demo Man. But, I don't know, that's just my 2 cents on that idea. What do you guys think? Now, something else I want to talk about is the SERVERBLIGHT learning more how to torment its victims, as well as it learning to communicate more. Well, sort of. We can totally see both instances of this during the scenes with Classic in them. When it comes to SERVERBLIGHT learning to torment its victims more, I feel like it's very apparent what I mean by that. We already know from the puppet creepypasta that all the victims are conscious. In the case of Classic, I'd even go as far as saying that at least during the Sawblade scene, he wasn't even fully assimilated. Almost like Ghillie Suit fused into his body so they couldn't run away. Honestly, I feel really terrible for Classic. Like, he genuinely seemed like a nice guy, but now he's just being eternally tormented. If the puppet creepypasta is anything to go off of, the cause for the screens of the assimilated players is some sort of burning sensation of millions of pixels all at once. And the fact that Classic is just non-stop screaming, I can only imagine that the SERVERBLIGHT is just making him feel continuous pain. Now, as for what I meant when I said that it's learning to communicate more, we see something that we haven't seen before. And that's a player with a mic that's been assimilated, making noises post-assimilation that they haven't uttered prior to them getting taken. Though, for what reason the SERVERBLIGHT has for having Classic groaning into his microphone, I'm not really sure. Unless, of course, it's not the SERVERBLIGHT doing that and it's Classic resisting and trying to communicate. Now, something else I want to bring up is something that I feel like is a bit of an elephant in the room. And that's of course a very apparent rivalry between the SERVERBLIGHT and Aaron. At this point, Aaron has managed to evade the SERVERBLIGHT at the very least 2 times now. Though it's more than likely that he's evaded it much more than just 2 times at this point. And now, it seems like the SERVERBLIGHT prefers to torment Aaron, sort of like playing with its food. That's almost definitely why I had Ghillie Suit join the game, because what's probably happening is Aaron's been following the SERVERBLIGHT around, and the SERVERBLIGHT more than likely knew that he'd be joining soon, so it sent Ghillie Suit, someone that knew Aaron would recognize. Though, the only odd thing to me is, if the SERVERBLIGHT likes to torment Aaron, why hasn't it sent the assimilated Matt after Aaron yet? We can infer from Aaron's Steam conversation with Bradolphin that he hasn't seen Matt since the Snowy Coast incident. So that could mean the SERVERBLIGHT simply just waiting for the perfect moment to send Matt to completely break Aaron's spirit and resolve. I'm almost certain that's going to be a major plot point in a future installment. I wonder how the creators are going to handle it, because it could honestly go either way. Either Aaron overcomes his feelings and successfully fights the assimilated Matt, who would more than likely be trying emotional manipulation tactics during this fight, or Aaron would freeze up and get assimilated. Honestly, something else I could see happening in the future would be Aaron doing his rounds trying to save players, and once he sees the assimilated Matt, he hesitates, leading to the people he tries saving to get assimilated. And while we're on the topic of Aaron, I'd like to bring up that shadow we saw behind him. Now, there's absolutely no doubt about it. This is 100% the shadow of an arm. More specifically, I'm pretty sure this is the arm of a scout. Now, we could interpret this in 2 ways. The first way is much more simple, and that's that this is simply just a manifestation of the SERVERBLIGHT in the real world, watching Aaron. Now, the other way we can interpret this is that it's a premonition of Aaron's fate. What do I mean by that? Well, as we see in Cyrenix, the merc we saw staying behind him before he got assimilated was a heavy. And sure, he technically got assimilated by several players at once, but the main player of note in this episode was Scuba Master, who's a heavy. So if we're sticking with this idea that whoever assimilates you is the merc that gets you in real life, then that might mean that whoever's the one that gets Aaron will be a scout. Now, we don't know that many scouts have been assimilated into the SERVERBLIGHT, except Direction Z. Honestly, it would be a little bit poetic irony if Direction Z, a player who was ultimately doomed by Aaron, ends up dooming Aaron to the exact same fate. But this is total speculation. Now, something I want to touch back up upon is actually Ghillie Suit. Now, again, this is total speculation, and that's purely because Ghillie seems to be a one of a kind, so I'm not really able to figure out any sort of commonality. With that said, I feel like there has to be some sort of correlation between the SERVERBLIGHT assimilating a dead player and how weirdly sadistic Ghillie is. Truth be told, I don't even know if Ghillie did get assimilated when he was dead. But I feel like back in the empty server, there's enough time between the SERVERBLIGHT chasing Aaron up the stairs and then jumping out the window to assimilate Ghillie's dead body. Now, if we're assuming the SERVERBLIGHT did assimilate Ghillie's dead body, then I almost want to say that Ghillie's more like an empty husk that the SERVERBLIGHT can manipulate however it pleases. We see in Migration that it wasn't even Ghillie's that was hitting his head on the floor, but rather it was the central mass that was doing it. Now, the reason why I think this theory might be the case is because of how the SERVERBLIGHT reacted to Brodolphin's dead ringer corpse. It's like the moment the body was on the ground and vulnerable, the assimilated pyro started reaching out, and Classic walked out to investigate. But the moment his body despawned, Classic walked away. Same goes for when Brodolphin accidentally gibbed himself. Headshot Fraudster immediately started making a beeline for his blasted apart body. It's almost like the SERVERBLIGHT prefers getting these dead bodies, perhaps because it gives it a little bit more autonomy with the bodies it assimilates. Actually, yeah, come to think of it, the SERVERBLIGHT always repeats phrases it's heard, except for the aforementioned Classic vocalizations and Ghillie saying, "I'm having so much fun." Am I cooking with this theory or what? Now, the last thing I want to talk about is something smaller, but it also opens the door for some major speculation, and that's the map they're on. So it's very apparent now that the SERVERBLIGHT's only going to servers without any out-of-bounds kill zones, so it practically guarantees it'll assimilate everyone in the match. However, it seems like its strategy is still flawed, because as Aaron displayed, there's still ways to get out. And as we know, the SERVERBLIGHT's learning. So does this mean the SERVERBLIGHT's just going to target servers without any out-of-bounds areas? Like, what if it targets games on maps like Turbine? Or, I don't know, like Junction? Who the hell plays on Junction? Both of these maps are completely indoors, and there's no out-of-bounds areas. So, what happens if the SERVERBLIGHT joins on one of these servers? Would the only way to escape being to finish the round? Or, I doubt the creators will explore this because it's more of an unserious map, but we know the SERVERBLIGHT only attacks community servers, at least for the time being. So what if it were to attack a trade server, like Trade Plaza? That's another map without any out-of-bounds areas. And there's no way to win on this map, or hell, even hide from the SERVERBLIGHT on either. Assuming the creators don't explore the idea of the SERVERBLIGHT targeting a Trade Plaza server, let's just chalk it up to the SERVERBLIGHT feeling like it'd be too easy. And that's all I really have to say about the series for the time being. Or at least, that's what I would have said if the creators didn't release a new episode while I was mostly finished recording voiceovers for this video! Yeah, that's right. We actually have an 8th video to summarize and analyze. So, buckle in while I break down awareness. So, this installment opens per usual with a normal TF2 game on, surprisingly, Double Cross. So, I guess it makes my theory about the SERVERBLIGHT targeting maps with no out-of-bounds kill zones wrong. Here we're introduced to one of our protagonists, a heavy who sounds frankly high off his ass, named Grey Matter. It ends up being revealed that he's helping teach his friend Nexus how to play TF2. And we totally get faked out by being made to think that Nexus is part of the SERVERBLIGHT. However, he just doesn't know how to use voice chat. It also ends up being revealed that they're playing with a third friend, that being a soldier named God's God. That is going to be a painful name for me to repeat. So, in usual SERVERBLIGHT fashion, we see an intense firefight, where God's God and Grey Matter encourages Nexus to run at the Heavy and blast him, which, shockingly, works. God damn, this Heavy sucks. Though, I think the thing that really gobsmacked me is the fact that Grey Matter really managed to sneak behind the Heavy and kill their medic using the fucking Warrior Spirit. Who the hell uses the Warrior Spirit? After winning that 2v3, Nexus gets taught how to taunt, and we hear God's God say something that I feel like is going to be important, and that's...
Taunting's how you act friendly in TF2.
Or shit on people.
After that lesson in taunts, they head on over to the sewers, but Nexus hurts himself, so he gets a health pack, and that's when he's put face to face with a soldier on his team. Thinking he wanted the health pack, Nexus banters at him and then does a scout melee taunt. And in response, hilariously, but also very eerily, the soldier does the exact same taunt back at him. Despite Nexus being put off by this, God's God writes it off as the game being buggy, which is pretty fair. I've definitely seen my own fair share of weird-ass bugs in the game like that. Once in the sewers, the friends give Nexus a pep talk on how to get the intel on this map, though it's pretty bad advice. And when they make it out of the sewers, the blue team spawn is weirdly deserted. That's when God's God drops a piece of information that to most people means nothing, but to keen viewers like myself, is actually fucking horrifying. He ends up revealing that this is a game of casual. But what's so terrifying about that, you might be asking? Well, up until this point, it's been implied that the SERVERBLIGHT exclusively targets community servers. But now, it's going after casual servers, where there's a lot more people for the SERVERBLIGHT to assimilate. Suddenly, an enemy soldier barrels down the stairs looking horrified, and after sharing a look with the friends, he starts firing at them, ultimately killing Grey Matter before Nexus could kill him. Despite being one man down, they decide to keep moving to the blue team intel, and that's when they're greeted with the sight of a friendly spy doing the high five taunt. Though, as the two approach him, we see the spy's grin widen very subtly. Also, strangely, God's God isn't able to taunt with the spy. While God's God keeps trying to taunt with the spy to no avail, Nexus picks up the intel, and when he steps outside, he finally sees it. A giant amalgamated mass of blue team players and that one red soldier that taunted back at Nexus. Now, I might be totally reading too much into this, but it almost seems like the soldier's helping Nexus. The way he's posed and is the only red team player in the mass makes it almost look like he's restraining the blue team players in his mass. I'll explain a bit more why I feel this way later. After seeing this mass of assimilated players, Nexus in a panicked state runs back to God's God and tells him they've got to go back to spawn. And that's when the spy's smile drops, looking almost sad or disappointed. And that's when the spy reveals that he's part of the SERVERBLIGHT and starts chasing the two, though God's God blows him up pretty easily. Once the two make it to the bridge, they reflect on what just happened, and that's when Nexus discovers he can't disconnect. But instead of saying the usual, "Why can't I disconnect?" he says something much more ominous and disturbing. And that's that he's seen this before. What the fuck do you mean you've seen this before? And God's God has the exact same reaction I think most of us have after hearing that. And that's just asking, what? But before Nexus can explain, he notices a heavy's hand wrapped around his friend's foot. And that's when God's God says one of the most heartbreaking things I think I've ever heard in the series so far.
I just wanted you guys to be friends.
Now alone, Nexus makes a mad dash back to spawn to capture the intel. However, he stops underneath the spawn room, and that's when he hears Grey Matter talking to him. However, by now, after everything we see in this series, it's pretty clear this isn't Grey Matter anymore. And curiously, the entire time, his face is hidden. Feeling very suspicious about this whole situation, Nexus starts to back off, and that's when the SERVERBLIGHT drops the act. We then hear the screams of the main mass of the SERVERBLIGHT coming from Red Team spawn, and that's when Nexus starts rushing to the intel room. However, the SERVERBLIGHT also pursues him, chasing after him from above, trying to cut him off from getting to the intel room. Though, I think because of its sheer mass, it wasn't able to fit through the upstairs door in time, and Nexus dives into the capture zone, winning the game for the team. Nexus then disconnects. However, before the episode ends, we see maybe one of the biggest bombshells in the series that we've seen so far. Every player respawns as seemingly normal again. The episode then ends with a shot zooming out of the red base as two players join the game. Okay, Jesus Christ, this episode seriously flipped everything I thought I knew about the series right on its head. Where do I even start with this? I guess we could start with this weird-ass soldier and spy. See, these two assimilated players stand out a lot to me. It's not just because they've learned how to taunt, presumably from these three friends, which by itself has some pretty disturbing implications. But no, it seems like these two are genuinely friendly assimilated players. But hold on, let me cook. Now, you're probably wondering how I even know that they're friendly, and not just manipulating these guys like the SERVERBLIGHT always does. Well, let's start with the soldier. I mentioned it earlier and I'll mention it again. When Nexus sees all these assimilated blue team players, we can see that the only red player in this mass is a soldier. Not only that, but it seems like he's also restraining all the assimilated blue team players. If we really stop and take a good look at this writhing mass of players, we can see that every single blue team player is either fused with the soldier or being blocked by the soldier. And I feel like it's also worth noting that the soldier made no effort to catch Nexus during their several second-long standoff, only making a half-assed attempt to grab him once he runs off. Now, as we know from the puppet creepypasta, these assimilated players are aware of everything, and even make futile attempts to resist. So what if the soldier is using whatever little bit of willpower he has left to try and save Nexus from an overwhelming horde of blue team players? It's also worth knowing the title of this installment when talking about this theory of mine. As we see with the last episode, Reflection, these titles can sometimes have a double meaning. With Reflection, it's both literally referring to the fake reflection Bradolphin saw, while also referring to how Aaron and Bradolphin reflect on the run-ins with the SERVERBLIGHT. As for this installment, I feel like awareness both refers to Nexus's previous awareness of the SERVERBLIGHT, but also the awareness the assimilated players have of their current situation. So what does any of this have to do with the spy? Well, I feel like the spy, much like the soldier, was resisting in his own strange way. See, for most viewers, the go-to thought when it comes to the spy is probably just, yeah, this is obviously a trap. Except, if it was a trap, it could have had such an easy time assimilating God's God when Nexus was getting the intel and looking at the amalgamation of this blue team. This could be a stretch, and maybe the spy really was trying to deceive them, but we can see how subtly the spy seemed to be happy that the two are being friendly, and God's God was trying to high-five him. And we can also see that the moment Nexus started freaking out, the spy looks sad and disappointed. Like he didn't want to attack them, but he has to. We know from the puppet creepypasta that after getting assimilated, you seem to lose a lot of your memories. And maybe after God's God explained that taunting is a sign of being friendly, the assimilated players may have remembered some aspect of their humanity that they've forgotten. Thus maybe explaining why the spy and soldier were strangely so docile towards these guys. Again though, there's a very good chance I'm reading way too deep into this, and simply the SERVERBLIGHT just fucking with these guys. Regardless of if these assimilated players are semi-friendly or not, it should still be seen as pretty alarming that the SERVERBLIGHT has learned how to taunt. during the standoff with the soldier on the lower bridge, you can see the gears in the SERVERBLIGHT's head turning as it tries to taunt for the first time. Like, holy shit, as a side note, seeing the soldier do the scout melee taunt was genuinely so unsettling that, like, all I could do when I saw it for the first time was just laugh in pure discomfort. Now, I'd like to circle back to what Nexus said about having seen this before, which is, like, extremely fucking ominous, given that he just never elaborates on what he means by that. I've got two main theories about this, though I feel like one is way more likely than the other. The first, less likely theory is that he's seen the SERVERBLIGHT in a YouTube video that a survivor of the SERVERBLIGHT recorded and uploaded in universe. However, I feel like this theory is less likely, mostly due to the fact that if he's seen videos like that, he'd probably never want to play TF2. Or at the very least, it means he's seen TF2 content before, which means he wouldn't be the complete noob that he's portrayed as being in this video. So then, as for my second theory, it's that the SERVERBLIGHT is not a TF2 exclusive thing. Nexus makes it pretty clear that he's not much of a gamer. However, the one game he states a couple times that he plays and has extensive knowledge of is Minecraft. Up until this point, we've all been under the impression that the SERVERBLIGHT was a TF2 exclusive thing, which, until now, we can infer it originated from TF2. However, now that we know it didn't necessarily originate from TF2, makes the SERVERBLIGHT way more disturbing and ambiguous. However, it does also open the door to a new theory I have. Although the SERVERBLIGHT didn't originate from inside TF2, what we do know is that the TF2 SERVERBLIGHT originated from a community server. Now, if Nexus were to encounter the SERVERBLIGHT in Minecraft 2, then that probably means it happened in a game of multiplayer. And unlike TF2, there's not really such thing as an official dedicated server in Minecraft. Pretty much every server in Minecraft runs off some kind of hosting service. See where I'm going with this? Now, let me cook here. But maybe the origin of the SERVERBLIGHT comes from some sketchy-ass server hosting site that offers cheap servers for games including Minecraft and TF2, and that's how the SERVERBLIGHT gets more people. I just know I'm cooking with this theory. Episode 9 of SERVERBLIGHT in Minecraft confirmed? Now, there's one last thing I want to talk about before I wrap things up, and that's of course the ending. Obviously, the ending has some insane fucking implications, so let's discuss it. Throughout the entire series, it's been shown that the only way to escape the SERVERBLIGHT is dying somewhere the SERVERBLIGHT isn't able to get you. However, we've never seen what happens when a round is completed. We've seen people like Cyronix attempt to win the game, but end up getting assimilated before being able to cap. However, in this installment, we can see that winning is one of the conditions that allows you to disconnect. Though, the more intriguing thing about it is that it seemingly fixes everyone. However, that raises a huge question for me. Are these players themselves anymore? I know my theories about the series seem to be erring more towards the side of optimism, such as a theory about the seemingly friendly assimilated players in this episode, but it should be noted that the series is pretty dark and depressing. And it seems like there's rarely many happy endings in the series, if any at all. So, in other words, I feel like it'd be a little too optimistic for me to say that these, quote, fixed players are really fixed. The main reason why I think that is, well, we saw Cyronix's dead body. I just don't think his soul's gonna get sucked back into his body Ermac style. So I'm fairly certain all the assimilated players are unfortunately dead as hell. So then there's really just three possibilities of what could have happened to all these players that are part of the central mass. The first one being that all winning the game did was just separate all the pieces of central mass, and it can just put itself back together again. The second one being that it killed the SERVERBLIGHT in the server, and now all these players are just stuck inside the game forever. The last one being a variation of the second possibility, and that's if both the SERVERBLIGHT and the players die, leaving all these player models behind as sort of like empty husks. Holy shit, wait, what? This is like how the creators go about explaining, like, why literally every single TF2 game, there's like 3 statues just chilling in spawn. What if, like, in a future installment, we see the reactions of the 2 players that joined the game at the end of this episode, and they're all just like, why the fuck is everyone AFK? Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. I'm very interested to see what direction the creators end up taking the series in, as there's truly an endless amount of possibilities on where the story can go. There's just so many questions that still need to be answered. Do you agree with my theories? Was I cooking? Or was I just harping on absolutely nothing this whole video? Tell me your thoughts and theories in the comments down below. And once again, show the creators of the series 2 idiot Germans lots of love and support. They're insanely talented. Links to their channel and the SERVERBLIGHT series are in the description down below. Like, not doing an insane amount of glazing again, but their skills with SFM and general cinematography are extremely impressive to me. Like, holy! Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching if you still are, and until next time.